could you bring the next witness to the witness table, please? Thank you. Okay, thank you. Good morning. For the record, could you state your name and the position you represent in your company?
My name is Benjamin Ang. I'm a senior fellow at the Center of Excellence for National Security, S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, NTU.
Thank you. The evidence which you'll be giving today before the committee will be taken on oath. If you so desire, you can take an affirmation. The clerk will now administer the oath, please.
I, Benjamin Ang, swear that the evidence which I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. Please be seated. Welcome to the public hearings on the Select Committee on Deliberate Online Falsehoods. The focus for today's evidence gathering session is for us to put questions to you, and you have taken a solemn obligation to answer our questions truthfully. I will now call upon Mr. Pritam Singh.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Ang.
Good morning.
I will go through your submission to the Select Committee titled Lies, Laws and Legitimacy, and there will be certain stages where I will ask for for you to confirm yes, correct, and so forth. And if you have something further to add, please do so. Okay, and I'm sure my colleagues also will have questions to ask thereafter. I move on to the second page of your submission, which is titled Existing and Proposed Legislation, and you cover 5 pieces of legislation in Singapore that can deal with or have capacity to deal with disinformation and propaganda. And this includes the Sedition Act, the Broadcasting Act, the Films Act, the Internal Security Act, and defamation law. You also referred to examples from other countries such as Europe. You speak of the German Network Enforcement Act. You talk about plans in Italy and France also to introduce laws to deal with deliberate online falsehoods, and including the US, which has a Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA, which was used against the Russian media channel RT, requiring them to make periodic public disclosure of their relationship with the foreign principal, as well as activities, receipts, and disbursements in support of those activities. And also you look at the Philippines, and of course there are other countries that are considering legislation as well. What is your view on legislation? Do you feel that this is something that Singapore should go down, a road that Singapore should go down? And do you also feel, or do you have a view as to what ought to be the limits of such legislation?
It is my view that some legislation will at some time be necessary because it will signal what the society approves of or does not approve of. But legislation has to be used as part of a multidimensional, multi-stakeholder approach, because if we are talking about deliberate online falsehoods as part of a strategic campaign, then it has to be dealt with at a strategic level. So legislation plus non-legislative measures.
Could you please expand a bit when you speak of a strategic level? I assume you're speaking of information operations, which is the second part of your submission, which covers multi-pronged strategic nature of information operations. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. I'm referring to information operations, which can include many different actors, such as state-sponsored media from foreign countries, business organizations which have been infiltrated, NGOs that have been infiltrated, and various other things like people in the country itself that may be helping to spread the information.
And you're essentially referring to academics, and you use the example of Professor Huang Ching, who had his permanent residency revoked for being an agent of influence. You speak of deceptive websites designed to look like mainstream news. You speak of extreme or biased websites, and you refer to Breitbart and Infowars.com. You refer to organized teams of civilians, example, China's 50 Cent Army. Volunteer groups of civilians, example, China's Bring Your Own Grainers. Thereafter, you speak of information operations more extensively. You say information operations can work on slow burn issues that can be equally, if not more, pernicious. As part of a larger long-term strategy, the deliberate online falsehood may be a decoy, distraction, or ruse. The operation of law can even be manipulated strategically by the attacker. Can you explain the last sentence, please?
So the example that I suggested is that in extreme or deceptive websites, a series of them can post a series of stories about a sensitive topic over a period of time. And these can range from total falsehood, so they would qualify, to some which are half-truths or biased reporting, to stories which appear to be false, but are later can be shown to be true because of some hidden information. And these could be shared on social media platforms that can be read in a country. And these could also be taken down validly by operation of the relevant legislation. But what could then happen is that subsequently the fact that these stories have been taken down could then be used to create a narrative that there's a conspiracy to hide the information.
And do you feel that this is a real concern if and when, hypothetically, legislation is introduced to take down content, if there's no explanation or no reason as to why this information was deemed fake news, this is a real threat that people actually assume that this is an attempt at a cover-up or censorship?
Yes, in fact, I would say that if we're talking about a strategic campaign of disinformation, because my paper is focused on something which is at that level, then it would not just be the assumption of the public, but there would be a narrative to create a conspiracy theory around the removal of the information.
And do you think there are ways and means to combat this narrative? For example, a court process where if indeed fake news is transmitted online, the government or an entity or even an individual can go to court and seek for the removal of that fake news. Do you think that process can somewhat dilute this? I would think it's a real concern of a narrative of the government wanting to censor or some entity wanting to censor. Do you think a court process could be helpful?
Definitely a court process would be helpful.
I move on to 3.2, the heading which starts 3.2, conspiracy theories and the backfire effect of corrections. Alternatively, instead of taking down the story, the government may want a right, to respond to deliberate online falsehood, compelling platforms to publish an official correction. This assumes that the platforms will find a way to make the corrections visible alongside the falsehoods and any variants. Would you agree that this may be logistically and practically very difficult, given the wide range of platforms and mediums through which fake news is transmitted?
Yes, I agree there should be some logistical difficulties.
You go on to speak of the issue we discussed about China's aggressive efforts to censor social media posts, and these have instead reinforced some users' belief that the censored posts are true, while dismissing officially sanctioned newspapers as government propaganda. In this state, these users are more likely to seek and trust news from alternative sources than from official sources. In your view, do you think this problem exists in Singapore and in the Singapore context?
In the Singapore context, at this current point in time, this might not be an issue, but we are looking at the future.
Okay. I refer to the section which starts at 3.4, perceptions and legitimacy. And you speak of Germany, for example, starting to introduce laws requiring social media platforms to even take down content. And you say that this has led to fears that legislation against online falsehoods can be misused to suppress criticism and to erode freedom of speech. Legitimacy in the exercise of power is much greater when it is limited and not left to any authority's unfettered discretion. This is helped by transparency in decision-making and meaningful checks and balances. And the next line says checks and balances can come from, as you gave evidence earlier. One, creating a judicial process to execute the law. And number two, and I find this interesting, creating an independent multi-stakeholder body to review decisions. Can you share with the committee what do you mean by creating an independent multi-stakeholder body to review decisions? What do you have in mind?
One of the concerns here, when you're looking at a strategic campaign, is that the disinformation will be coming from a multi-pronged attack. So there will be different aspects of the information campaign which are not known to any particular, which might not be known to a particular organization that is looking at the deliberate online falsehood that has arisen. So it would require a more cross-sectional group that has a greater awareness of other factors which may be in play, that there is a wider objective in this particular campaign to create a particular conspiracy or to create a particular narrative. And so having a multi-stakeholder group enables a wider range of views and inputs to help to make the decision of how to respond.
And who would be the representatives of this multi-stakeholder group, and who would fund it? Or would it be entirely volunteer-based?
That would be...
I don't mean to put you in a spot. I mean, if you have considered these, please share them. But if you have not, it's all right.
Yes. The stakeholders should have representation from the public sector and private sector, and as well as civil society. And as for the funding, the difficulty of having government funding, of course, is that then it may not be seen to be independent. But as to who else would fund it, I think that is an open question.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fair. I move on to the implementation of this multi-pronged approach, and you identified Latvia as an example, and you went through, there are four particular points you make here. This is at page 8 of your submission. Mm-hmm. For the immediate measures to be effective, there must be an environment of trust which is built in the preemptive stage on continuous transparent communication between public and government. And the Latvian approach to building social resilience to falsehoods is a useful model. You speak of enhanced critical thinking through education, and by this I mean are you meaning through schools?
Through schools, and also through education, adult education, and also through other forms of spreading the information. And the whole idea of this is not just through campaigns and through lessons, but also in terms of building trust and winning hearts and minds, some of which has to be at a ground level and face-to-face, which will create that environment of trust so that in future, when a deliberate online falsehood comes up, more people are likely to believe what is true rather than the falsehood.
I think you would agree with me that an entity like the government of the day would have to lead this exercise, and therein also lies a potential contradiction when you try to build that sort of a trust between stakeholders such as citizens and government. Do you think there's any role other institutions can play to bridge these various stakeholders like the government, civil society, the public sector, the private sector as well? Because obviously when the government leads, and particularly given our political history, that there could be some concerns that this is government messaging top-down. Are there any approaches that you have considered which could ameliorate these effects?
In our particular context, I agree that there would be that concern. And if civil society can actually help with this, that creates a greater level of perceived independence.
I now move on to the paper that you have annexed to your submission, which I believe also is a submission put together by your colleagues at CENS, if I remember correctly, actually. Yes, and I would like to refer to page, because this is Annex A, page 8, item 2.2, non-legislative measures. And there's a clear line which says legislation alone is insufficient in tackling the challenges of fake news. And you go on then to describe what certain countries have done, including Indonesia, including the Czech Republic, and Qatar even, to address some measures that could be used to distinguish between false news on the one hand and credible information on the other. You move on then to describe your recommendations. You speak of the Streisand effect, and you speak of the potential of even fining technology companies. When I say you speak of, I'm referring to your submission, which includes the annex.
Yes, that's right.
Just to confirm, the recommendation actually includes, and this is at page 16, once again, an impartial body devoted to the fight against disinformation operations. Have you or your colleagues discussed the nature of this impartial body to deal with some of these problems?
We have seen through our research that in other countries there are fact-checking organizations, for example, which are not related to the government of the country, that provide these actions and who are actively seeking out fakes and highlighting them and disputing them. How that would run in Singapore is something that needs to be researched and explored.
Thank you. Chairman, I have no further questions for the witness.
Mr. Desmond Lee.
Mr. Ang, thank you for your written submission and for appearing to give oral evidence today. Just want to take you through your paper and add on to what my colleague, Mr. Singh, had asked you about. First, I bring you to page 1, scope and scale, and I quote, this paper focuses on deliberate online falsehoods that amount to national security threats originating from state or non-state actors who wish to destabilize Singapore. This will include information operations, a term used in this paper to describe integrated employment of the core capabilities of electronic warfare, computer network operations, psychological operations, military deception, and operation security in concert with specified supporting and related capabilities to influence, disrupt, corrupt, or usurp adversarial human and automated decision-making, unquote. So just want to confirm that the recommendations in your paper pertain to tackling such national security threats as described before mentioned.
For the purposes of my paper, I focused on this level of threat.
Yes. And in terms of the national security threat focusing or centered around deliberate online falsehoods that you're focusing your recommendations on, at page 3, as my colleague had also brought to your attention, you had described how deliberate online falsehoods in a deliberate operation against the country, whether Singapore or otherwise, would be a tip of the iceberg, and they would typically come with a whole range of concerted parallel attacks. For instance, in addition to deliberate online falsehoods, you say that there could be falsehoods spread by state-sponsored media of foreign countries. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
You also say that business organizations or clan associations can also play a part, especially if the members have business in foreign countries. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
You also cited NGOs that may be infiltrated.
Yes.
Number 4, you cite political parties that have the same views or may have been infiltrated by the foreign power. Is that correct?
Yes.
5th, you refer to academics who may be agents of influence of the foreign power. Number 6, you refer also to deceptive websites that are made up to look like mainstream sites that can also be part of that operation.
Yes.
7, you refer to extreme or biased websites like Breitbart and InfoWars.
Yes.
8, you refer to computational propaganda or bots on social media that help to amplify the falsehoods.
Yes.
Number 9, you refer to organized teams of civilians.
Yes.
And number 10, you refer to volunteer groups of civilians, so both organized as well as those who volunteer and step forward.
Yes, that's right.
So 10, if I may say, parallel prongs that help to amplify the deliberate online falsehoods spread online as part of an operation to destabilize a country.
Yes.
And you've articulated this as a national security threat.
Yes, that's right.
Can I then take you to your recommendation of an independent multi-stakeholder body to review decisions at page 6, where in response to my colleague Mr. Singh's questions, you had suggested that such a body would be multi-stakeholder. You're concerned that this body that deals with online falsehoods should not be funded by the state, because that might cause some concerns about the motivations of the body. Am I correct?
That is right.
So I'm just trying to reconcile, Mr. Ang. You had talked about, your recommendation in this paper is about the national security threat to subvert the stability of a country, involving not just deliberate online falsehoods, but supported by a multi-pronged attack, infiltrating organizations, using the foreign media, galvanizing civilians, using bots. So it's a very concerted effort to attack a country and to hollow it out from within. I'm trying to reconcile that with your recommendation for, instead of government tackling this problem, for government to let another body, independent of government, not funded by government, tackle a national security threat. And I'm just comparing this with kinetic warfare. I don't think when a country is attacked by conventional forces, you outsource it to somebody else, or where a country faces a terrorist threat, where religious organizations or religious ideas are being subverted, and where there are equal sensitivities about the government's motivations, that government outsources it instead of using the police to deal with it. What is the difference here between kinetic threats, internal security threats such as terrorism and radicalization, and national security threats attacking a society as you've described earlier? What is the difference in these three kinds of national security threats that would, in your view, warrant a different approach, that is not the government, but somebody else that takes the lead to use legislation or other means?
To clarify, I actually agree with what you are saying, that for national security threats, it would be the government that has to take action. And the government may take action through a strategic approach to whether the particular deliberate online falsehoods are taken down, or they are refuted, or any other means that are taken to deal with it. So that would be a government function for a national security threat. And so the independent review is actually meant more for the checks and balances, for the legitimacy of the actions that have been taken. So it's different sides of the same coin.
Thank you for your clarification. So to confirm, in your view, that national security threat posed by deliberate online falsehoods, together with the multiple prongs that come along with it, are things that governments have to take responsibility for and has to deal with squarely.
Yes, a national security threat has to be dealt with by the government.
But because, in your view, at paragraph 3.4, there may be perceptions of misuse of power or state power in respect of deliberate online falsehoods and the potential for its use against what are legitimate comments and facts being put out, that therefore, in respect of this form of national security threat, some form of check and balance is needed to assure the public that this power is properly used.
Yes, that's right.
So in your view, it is a matter of whether a power provided to state is properly used or abused, and that there must be some form of redress and some form of check and balance.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Ang.
Ms. Chia?
Thank you, Mr. Ang. Couple of questions. I think, first of all, if we look at paragraph 3.4 of your paper, you also referred to countries which talk about fake news, and I think later on you also referred to the importance of disclosure or sponsorship of content. I just want to ask you this point about sponsorship of content, disclosure of sponsorship. Now, if I were an actor perpetrating falsehood, would you think I would disclose my identity? In other words, even if we had a policy, and I think it's a good suggestion. I'm not saying we should deal away with it, but what is the extent of reliance that one could have if we are actually dealing with people who are perpetrating falsehoods? Why should there be a disclosure of who the actual sponsor is, and whether having such a disclosure may in fact lead people to think that there is more room or more ground to rely on that particular content?
To clarify, the disclosure of sponsorship is not something that would work in isolation, and I agree that there are ways around it, and the intent is to create a greater sense of accountability and a method of tracking so that it then makes it more difficult for the deliberate online falsehood to be dispersed.
Thank you. So if I come back again to paragraph 3.1, which Minister Desmond Lee took you through, I think we generally agree, just very broadly, we have two categories of actors, state actors as well as non-state actors, and I think we recognize that state actors can operate through non-state actors, and which is why you have such a long list of other potential agents in this operation. So when we look at, for example, business organizations or clan associations, you would imagine that it is not necessarily always the case that one has to make a outrightly political or racial or religious or anti-religious statement, but rather that, say, if I were, or if my organizations, my member companies in my business organization were operating in country X, and they were not given an easy time, that could then result in this content, distrust of your own government and your own association and perhaps even your own organizations, and thereby ferment internal division as well, civilian division as well. So we could be potentially looking at all these agencies that could be manipulated to ferment internal division. Is that correct also?
Yes, that is right.
Thank you. So likewise for the use of civilians and volunteer groups too, this could have been influenced to swing to a particular ideology or to be persuaded to a particular prejudice, and this could again be rather potent agents. Thank you. Now if you look at paragraph 4, where you have set out a table for us, you drew a distinction, not the flow chart, but the table. 4.1, yes. Thank you. So you've got a chart where you've got 3 columns: preemptive measures, immediate, and long-term. I think we generally agreed that there isn't a single silver bullet, and we need a whole suite of implements in our arsenal to fight this. But looking at preemptive measures and immediate measures, I believe that there are even colleagues among your institution, and we have heard many witnesses and read papers and submissions, which have actually shared that there is basis to believe that we're actually already at the we are actually already at the time when the campaign has started. So we are no longer at before a campaign of deliberate online falsehoods, but we are in the midst, so we're actually under intermediate measures at the moment, which means that at this point in time, assuming that you agree, I'm not sure whether you agree that any campaign has started.
So to use Minister Desmond Lee's analogy of kinetic warfare, unlike the kinetic warfare where you will actually see the troops arrive and you know the war has started, information operations are ongoing. There are a spectrum. Some are already in immediate measures. Some may already be over, and there are more to come. And the preemptive measures would be taken in view of the information operations which are to come, because this is probably something that's going to be with us for many years. So we still have we may be in an immediate measures phase, as some of my colleagues have shared, and we are also in a preemptive phase for the future operations.
Indeed, which is why we need a whole suite of measures to counter fake news. So what I am saying simply is that we have actually entered an immediate action phase, just that we continue to have to take preemptive action as well to safeguard ourselves. So based on that, then it is necessary for us, would you think, to differentiate the different types of falsehoods and the different impact, and therefore take a calibrated action to address the different types of falsehoods. Would you agree?
I agree.
Yes.
Calibrated action.
And I'm not sure if this was raised earlier, but I think Mr. Singh did also talk about judicial review. So I want to just clarify my own understanding. If we have a situation where there is executive action intervening and issuing a takedown order, or even more serious than a takedown order, but with recourse for judicial review, that will also be an option that you will be prepared to accept.
Yes, it will be one of the options.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ang, can I just ask you just a final set of questions in respect of paragraph 4.2 at the top of page 8? Mr. Singh had also asked you some questions regarding your reference to the Latvian approach to building social resilience to falsehoods. And you say, number 1, explain and identify the problem and the attacker's tactics to public. 2, implement national level strategic communications to win hearts and minds and minimize the gap between government and citizens. 3, enhance critical thinking through education. And 4, engage citizens directly without the media. It means face-to-face, the old-fashioned going around and talking to people. Mr. Ang, your specialty or your focus, your specialization is in national security in various forms at the S. Rajaratnam School.
Yes.
There are just a couple of points that I'd just like to put before you, and please advise us if our understanding is correct. At the early part of our select committee's hearings, we'd heard from some experts, for example, Dr. Carol Soon and others, Dr. Jayakumar as well, Sashi Jayakumar, that when an info operation takes place, when it's begun, the state may or may not realize that it is being attacked, or that it has commenced, or that it's underway. As compared to, as you said earlier, kinetic warfare, you have periods of tension, you can see troop deployments, troop movements, concentrations, and initial forays, and then kinetic conventional warfare begins. But in an info operation, which is deliberate, a state may or may not realize that. Is that a correct understanding?
I agree.
Second, in kinetic warfare or in a terrorist attack, it's also possible that the state under attack may or may not know or may not have proof immediately or in the immediate aftermath about the identity of and the tactics used by the attackers. We may not know who they are, we may not know what exactly they've done. For instance, news reports about attacks in eastern Ukraine and in the Crimea, given the nature of the attire of the combatants, media was, and the authorities were not quite clear who the combatants were. In the attacks on Mumbai by a terrorist group that launched from the sea onto shore, it was not immediately clear who or what the organization was until someone puts up their hand and says, I did it. And even then, it takes some verification to verify who the perpetrator is. And likewise, in deliberate online falsehoods and information operations. Is that accurate summary?
Yes, I agree.
Number 3, would it also be correct to say, contrary to kinetic warfare and a terrorist attack, that in relation to information operations, right, that it may or may not be in Singapore's strategic or diplomatic interest to call out the state actor or non-state actor that we believe has launched an information operation.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, as there are no further questions, Mr. Ang, thank you very much for participating in the select committee
Thank you.
process. We'll be sending you a transcript within the next few days. If there are any corrections, any errors, please correct them and send it back to us. Okay? Thank you very much again.